Today we're going to be speaking with Martin Sellner. He is the head of the Remigration Institute based in Austria. He is an author of books like Regime Change from the Right, and has been a prominent intellectual and leader in the identitarian and remigration movement in Europe, and particularly in the German-speaking world. Obviously Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and some other adjacent countries. I'm pleased today to be joined by Martin Sellner, coming to us, I believe, from Vienna. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
I got that right. You're in Vienna right now, right?
Yes.
Very good.
Vienna,
beautiful city. Everyone who has not been to see the Ringstrasse and the Opera House and the Parliament, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous city. I'm very envious.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to talk to you for a little while now. Your name has been, I think, emerging. First from Austria, and then across the broader German-speaking world, and then Europe, and it's even starting to get its way into North America. I expect that I'm going to get an email after we publish this interview from the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, Press Progress, the usual round of people who think that any vision beyond having a multicultural economic zone makes one an extremist racist. So I'm expecting that to happen, because I've seen your name pop up as someone who's very dangerous and should not be talked to, listened to, or read about, which is why I have to talk to you now. So I guess we'll just start. Some people, I want to see maybe if this is correct. Some people have attributed the term remigration itself to you. Is that fair?
Well, no. The word itself does not come from me. It was used scientifically in political sciences all the time, and it was just a very factual term for the process of somebody returning to his homeland. But then in France, in the year of 2012, 2013, French identitarians were starting to use the term in an activist context. And we took it because we founded the biggest patriotic NGO, the Austrian chapter, the identitarian movement. And we were the first one to put remigration into actions. We had banners, we had flyers with remigration. And then in the year about 2022, 23, after COVID, there was a huge push from us with a remigration campaign. And then it took on speed. And I have the credentials. Bloomberg, they wrote in a big analysis piece that I was the most important remigration influencer during this period. So I take this badge of honor. And I think we've been very influenced in mainstreaming this term and this idea on the globe.
Okay. Well, I think that, that's certainly fair. I've seen your name associated with it quite a bit. I mean, maybe for those who aren't as deep into this topic, maybe explain what is remigration and what is identitarianism?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with remigration because it's actually quite easy. You have immigration, you have remigration. Remigration means the process of inversing these flows of migration, not just closing the border, but also sending illegals home, but also creating push and pull factors so that unwanted migration, also unwanted legal migration, stops and people who don't fit slowly but steadily go home. There are many proposals, many concepts. We have an amazing deportation policy from Restore Britain. I've written a book myself about this issue, and it's basically just the 180-degree answer, the inversion of all the multiculturalist policies we had until then. So that, in summary, is remigration. It means we stay and they go. And this is based, obviously, on identitarianism, which is kind of an umbrella term for national conservative right-wing thinking in Europe. There's the European New Right. I don't know if your viewers are familiar with that. It's a philosophical and political movement which was very prominent in France and Germany after the Second World War, and basically understood, okay, the core of all right-wing politics has to be the identity, the ethno-cultural identity and continuity as a threat. So it's not so much about a political system or an economic system or a certain belief set. No, it's about this threat. And this is basically the ideology of identitarianism. It means putting identity, putting the people first, and trying to create an alliance and creating a bridge between all these different ideological and economical sects that splinter the right.
So, I mean, that's obviously a movement mostly associated with the right, but you know, I think from what I take away from your saying and what I've observed, it's not exclusive to the right. There's the Danish Social Democrats, for example, I think could be considered kind of a light version of identitarianism, but found on the center left. I don't. Maybe you want to correct me if I'm wrong about that, but it doesn't seem to be exclusive to the right. It's just obviously most associated with the right because the right tends traditionally to be more nationalistic than the left, but not exclusively.
True, absolutely. I think there are many arguments and many cases to be made for remigration, also from an ecological or even like labor and left-wing perspective. There are a lot of critiques. Unfortunately, they're very alone within the political scene from the left who say mass migration is undercutting wages. It's against the interest of the working class. Mass migration is making the rich richer, and it's also keeping up an unfair and unbalanced world system. So this mass exodus, especially from skilled people, the brain drain from Africa, is not making Africa richer, safer, or better. It's a very important moral case for remigration. And also ecologically, if you look at Europe and especially countries like Switzerland, Austria, Germany, this idea of ever-growing nations where we don't have enough space and we have to cut down all our forests and destroy all our beautiful meadows just to increase building and housing for millions of Africans and Arabs coming in are also very important arguments found on the left. And you're absolutely right and spot on. The Danish Social Democrats are way more progressive in their remigration policy right now than the German Christian conservatives. And here you see a also very important point that I always focus on, metapolitics. How important is the public discourse and how this public discourse and public perception always trumps the political party system.
Well, yeah, I do want to get into metapolitics, but we'll get to there. We'll talk maybe about the issues first, but I'm interested in that and how you see that fitting in. Why would you use the term identitarian as opposed to nationalism? I know in Germany and Austria the term nationalism carries some unwanted historical baggage, but I know, certainly outside of Germany and Austria, I think it carries less of a stigma. But what would you see as the difference between them, and why would you kind of choose to use the term identitarian more than nationalism?
How philosophical can I get in my answer? That's the question.
That's up to you.
So, yeah, you're right. Like the term national obviously has kind of a baggage in Austria and Germany. People see it and it's perceived as way more radical than, for example, in the Anglosphere. But for us also, identitarian and identity is a term which is way more bigger and also older. Because if you look at the modern nation state, it's quite of a new phenomenon. And one of important hero of a movement is Leonidas, the Spartan king, or Prince Eugen, the French guy who fought for the Austrian army against the Ottomans. And back then you didn't really have nations. And so we think that also just focusing on the nation state and national identity has some pitfalls. For example, you cannot really achieve a European unity, like this idea of being united here, also in the whole West and as people with European descent. And for me, identity is just the encompassing term, because there is a threat from Leonidas to us, from Prince Eugen to us, and over different changes of political systems, from tribes to nations to empires. This always has been our identity, and that's why we defend it. And as Alain de Benoit, one of our forethinkers, and that's as philosophical as it will get, said, identity is what stays the same during change. And that's what we want to defend, and that's why we love this term.
Am I correct then in saying that identitarianism is kind of it's then just kind of pan-European nationalism, not in the EU bureaucratic sense, which I think is actually anti-nationalist. It's against the identities of Europe's nation states, but identitarianism would be like kind of pan-European nationalism without the anti-national nationalism. Is that a fair way of looking at this?
It's a good way, but we are not like European nationalists. Like we believe in the nation state, obviously. Mm-hmm. But as identitarians, we try to balance the three levels of identity, as we say it, like the civilization level, which obviously is above the nation, the national level, and the regional level. We also love regional cultures. We are big fans of regional identity, regional culture, which is very important to us. So we don't like it when, for example, the nation state acts as an agent of equalizing everything and destroying regional cultures. But also, if you only focus on the nation state, you can forget the civilizational bond. But obviously, we are also against the European bureaucracy. So identitarian just basically means balancing out the three levels, defending them, and also understanding the both sides of your identity, which is ethnic and cultural. So we say our identity has three layers and two sides. And as identitarians, we want to understand it and defend all of it.
So the nationalists, identitarians, the obvious kind of knee-jerk reaction or critique of them is that, well, that's racism, that's discriminatory, it's exclusionary. I mean, you obviously will get that on a daily basis. That's kind of just what they'll throw at you. I don't know. What's the response to that? That the focus on your identity, your ethnicity, your nationality, wanting to make sure Austria is Austrian, France is French, England is English. How do you respond to your critics? They'll just say, well, you're just racist ethnocentrists.
Yeah. Racism, as you know, is a conversation ender. It's basically always a sign that the other side has no arguments left, and racism has become a code word for anti-European and very often anti-white hatred and sentiments, because it's only brought up against European and white people when they just want to exist and they just want to cherish their existence and preserve their existence. And identitarianism, in my opinion, is the absolute opposite to real racism, which is when you hate groups, when you have a blanket hatred against groups, or you want to kill people or really treat them in a negative way just based on their ethnicity. Because as an identitarian patriot, I love my own culture, but I respect all the others. Because when I love my own culture, how could I deny anyone else to love and to maintain his own culture? So what we want actually is a multipolar world full of identities and full of nations. And we just demand, politely, but also very consequently, our own place and our own country in this world. And to claim that this is racist is completely outrageous. And I just want to make this more concrete with a little anecdote. Elon Musk, whom we all know on X, he's talking very often about natalism, about increasing birth rates. And he was talking very often about Japan and South Korea, that South Koreans are dying out. We need to increase the birth rates there. Nobody cared. And suddenly when he started talking about Europeans and said, we need to save white Europeans, everybody was freaking out. Exactly same situation, same terms, but suddenly it's obviously seen as offensive to not want to fade away into the darkness. And I think this in itself, if we want to talk about real racism, is actually racism when you want to deny a whole ethnic group is the right for an identity, the right for pride, and the right for survival. So I would say, no, that's completely wrong. But I'm very happy when my opponents bring this up, because it's been so overused that nobody cares anymore. So it's a very, very weak argument.
We published a guest column from Daniel Tyree of the Canadian Dominion Society, and they're very involved in the remigration project. And it was called "What is a Canadian?" And he tried to make the argument that it's the original Indigenous people, and it's largely the descendants of the original English, Scottish, Irish, and French settlers, and then other Europeans who came and successfully assimilated into it. I come. My family's Germany, Austria, etc. But we've largely assimilated into Anglo-Canadian culture. But
you also, I have to say, you have an Austrian face.
I have an Austrian face. I don't know if that's a good
Absolutely.
thing or bad thing. My Prussian Opa.
It's an amazing. It's the best thing. It's the best thing. But if I would see you on the street, I would think like you look Austrian, maybe from Upper Austria, something like that. So that would be my classification.
Well, thank you. But my Prussian Opa might not like that, but my more Austrian Bohemian Oma would. So, defining what is a ethnic Canadian is much more difficult, I think, than defining what is an ethnic Austrian, was an ethnic Frenchman, ethnic Pole, Englishman, etc. Because those are ancient countries, and the people are genuinely indigenous to the land. For the most part, European borders have shifted, etc. But for the most part, largely indigenous to the areas. So the question, the headline was posed as a question: what is a Canadian? And we've got someone. I think we're expecting a rebuttal piece to it today. Someone who disagrees maybe with how he defined it. But I think it'd be okay. Well, I'll just ask you then: what is an Austrian?
I would say Austrian is obviously somebody who lives here, has this Austrian passport in the legal sense. But apart from this classification, you also have the very long and very ancient history of the people who have been living here. And for this, you have a culture, an ethnicity, a lineage, but also a consciousness. And I think these things together, the lineage, the culture, but also the consciousness of being an Austrian and of being part of this, as Edmund Burke put it, this deep pact, this contract between those who are living, those who have passed away, and those who are yet to come. This makes somebody an Austrian. But obviously, I would say, apart from that, if it gets to be more concrete, we are people that loves to eat. We have amazing music. We have the perfect combination between the rigidity, the order from the German culture and language sphere, which we're obviously a part of, together mixed with a bit of Southern and Eastern European flavor. So that's what you have in Vienna, that's what you have in Austria. And obviously we are also deeply shaped by our history because Austria was a bastion of Europe. So the Austrians always in the border region had to defend their identity against Turkish invasions, against the Hungarians before they became Christianized and then part of the European civilization. And also as part of a border area of the whole German Empire and the German area, this was always an area of a lot of warfare and having to defend your own identity. And that's also what makes the Austrians a very patriotic, very stubborn people. We also mountain people. We have all the mountains in the area, a rugged people. So that's what makes an Austrian. And I hope you're satisfied with this definition.
Yeah, I often get asked by people, if they're going to Europe on vacation or something, and they say, Derek, what's the best part of Germany? I always say Austria.
Well,
yeah, I know that's a loaded answer, but it's got the culture and whatnot, a shared culture, but it's actually stronger, more pronounced there.
True. It's a bit like that in Bavaria, but I would say also I think Austria has the best from both sides. But when it comes to Canada, I understand your identity is way more complex, but still, also the Austrian identity as it exists today, for example, also Austria as this nation state is something very new and changing a bit and shaping the identities. For example, after the Second World War, the majority of Austrians did not identify with Austrian at all. Like they said, okay, we're all Germans. But this is changing steadily in Austria. So there is something that you can call an ethnogenesis. The Dutch people were part of the German Empire. German Swiss, same. But the Dutch people, they would now say, okay, we're Dutch. So what's happening or what's going on in Canada, I think it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process of forming a very distinct identity, but obviously basing this identity only on ideas, on abstract values, will not lead to a real nation and a real identity, but basically just, a zone, an economic zone where a conglomerate of different ethnicities lives for a while, basically like a liminal space or like an airport lobby. So I think it's up to you as Canadians and as European Canadians of the descendants who founded this nation to define what it means to be Canadian. It's harder, but it's also cool because you can be very creative in this process as well.
Well, I mean, Austria is a particularly interesting case. be interested in your take on it, because I see it. You mentioned the Dutch. They were always maybe a bit more different. They spoke of a very different dialect. The Austrians obviously have a different dialect than High German and Berlin, etc. But I see them as a part of a ethnic German identity, but with a civic national identity as well. Civic identity as Austrians, but still national in the sense of the German world. Similar-ish, but maybe not as much as, say, the Swiss. Or the Swiss-speaking Germans. So you can have overlapping identities. In Alberta, if there is such a thing as an ethnic Canadian identity, if such a thing is there, it's a debatable point. Then Albertans would share it. We share an Anglo-Canadian ethnic identity, but some of us have a separate civic identity as Albertans. That we're a distinct polity, and we have some differences, but we don't consider ourselves a different ethnicity than the rest of Canada. We're a part of a broader pan-Anglo-Canadian culture, but we still have a different civic identity. I don't know how much maybe that fits in with the parallel with Austria.
True. It might fit in a bit, but Austria also has a different history in a way. Also the Austrian Empire was in this duel, in this conflict with Prussia, and had their own policy. Obviously, back then, Austria was not part of a people. It was the noble house, the aristocracy of the House of Austria. Mm-hmm. But I would say, yes, there are definitely similarities. But obviously, at the moment, I'm quite happy that we are not part of the German nation, which is run by, I would say, a left-wing suicide pact. And in Austria, the Freedom Party, for example, is polling at around 39%. And there's a high chance that we are able to really make remigration a reality in Austria within the next years. So I think at the moment, especially when the zeitgeist is so anti-European, anti-white, anti-national, then it's maybe even better to have smaller entities and smaller communities, in which is easier to get political sway and to maybe even flip the whole thing.
That sounds like another parallel with a lot of what's happening in Alberta right now. At the risk of, okay, everyone just stay with me for a second. This is going to be kind of a niche-ish thing to talk about, but I think it's instructive of kind of what are the problems facing remigration, identitarianism, nationalism, etc. I want to talk about the recent state election in Baden-Württemberg. So for those who don't know, let's put it up on the map. Baden-Württemberg is a state in southwest Germany. It's just west of Bavaria. They just had a state election there, and the Green Party came out just ahead. Let's put the election results up as well. The Green Party came 1, maybe 2 points ahead of the CDU. The CDU is the nominally conservative, so-called conservative party in Germany. And the AfD, the more nationalistic, identitarian party, came in a strong third, but not in contention to be the first place party, but came in a strong third. All the other parties either were shut out of the local parliament or are extremely small. And so the CDU was in a position where it could decide how the government was going to be formed here. It could play the junior coalition partner and support putting the Greens, led by a Turkish guy, in power, or it could be in power itself as the senior coalition partner, but they would have to allow the AfD to be the junior coalition partner. They chose, as conservatives, to be a junior coalition partner under a Turkish Green Party guy, than to be the government themselves as the senior guys, but allow the AfD in. So for a Canadian, there's no exact parallel to a Canadian audience, but bear with me with the analogy. This would be like Pierre Poilievre deciding that he will be deputy prime minister under Elizabeth May, rather than be prime minister himself, but allow Maxime Bernier to be a part of the cabinet. That is the madness that is taking place right now. I know that there's Firewall, the Braumeier, all that stuff. Could you just explain for a Canadian audience why the hell a conservative would rather be second place partner under Turkish Greens than lead the government themselves with the assistance of people who are as conservative as their own party was probably 15 years ago?
because the Greens are secretly ruling Germany. The Green Party in Baden-Württemberg, they're very strong, but on a national level, they're not that strong at the moment in Germany. So they're polling from the latest poll at 12%. But if you look in media, in elections of journalists, if you look at elections and pollings in universities, the Green Party has an absolute majority there everywhere. And with this majority and with their media power, they've created a firewall, which means the AfD is untouchable. The AfD has a very severe and very viral illness, and you mustn't have to do anything with them. And the CDU is so afraid of the Green Party and so afraid of the media apparatus and also of the Antifa that they basically say, okay, we don't want to have power, we are complying. So the CDU is completely cucked. They're politically castrated in Austria and Germany, the Christian conservatives, and they're the slaves of the left. They live in the basement of the left, and they always, when they have a high result, have to form coalition with the left and then find some middle ground, some compromise. And that's why, obviously, all of the promises are always broken. Just to make it a bit more palatable for the people, once there was a case in the German parliament where the CDU wanted to pass a motion, and there was a majority that they could have with the AfD and some other deputies. It was a time when the coalition was broken and there was a free play of forces. And then, just for thinking about it, like the CDU was attacked by Antifa. Antifa were attacking CDU politicians, saying, okay, you're fair game. We are treating you like the Nazis now. And then the CDU completely backed down and didn't bring in any motion, just for fear that this motion would be passed through with the votes of the AfD politicians. So even the votes of the AfD politicians are toxic. It's a very crazy, I would say, semi-religious behavior. And this is what's going on in Germany. And unfortunately, another thing, I don't know how it is about Canada. In Germany, it's harder, cycle by cycle, to win for patriots because of the ethnic vote. So migrants are forming a bigger and bigger part of the electorate, non-assimilated migrants, and they're obviously voting for left-wing parties.
Mm-hmm. There's significant evidence of it here, although the pollsters don't really tend to break it down, that kind of background as much. But I think we commission polls from time to time, and I actually haven't asked them to put that in as one of the crosstab data points, and I'm just going to start putting that in because I think that's an increasingly defining characteristic of our politics across the West. I want to kind of come back to where we were asked. I asked, what is an Austrian? The follow-up question to that, and this is going to be a spicy one, but I'm sure you've gotten it before, is can a non-European become an Austrian? Can an African, can an Arab become an Austrian? Can they be Austrian?
Again, I make the separation between the civic nationality and like the ethno-cultural identity. Yes, civically, obviously, you can get a passport. Unfortunately, it's super easy in Austria. It's very easy to get the Austrian passport. But when it comes to this identity that I mentioned before, there also have to be a differentiation. So yes, you can assimilate into the Austrian culture. And I think there are some migrants who have done this way better than Austrians. So they know more about Austrian music, history, and they're also more well-mannered. But obviously, you cannot be trans-Austrian. So when it comes to the lineage, you cannot fake a lineage and you cannot assimilate yourself into an ethnicity. That just doesn't work. I know it's harsh to say that, but it's just the reality. And we have to be very true. Truth is the ultimate goal and the ultimate value. And just as you, as a man, cannot become a woman, obviously, I cannot become an African or Chinese ethnically, if I really would want it to. Does this make this person not a real Austrian? So that's a big debate. It's basically an ontological debate. My stance is, yes, some people who have a different descent can assimilate into the broader body politic and in the people, and can become part of this nation. But obviously, it's a long-term process that in the end also takes several generations. But this has to be an exception, and it cannot be in masses, because otherwise the very identity that people would want to assimilate into would be destroyed by that. And my argument for this is always, if I would go to Japan, if I want to become part of the Japanese culture, I'll learn the language, I'll learn kendo and judo, and become immersed in Japanese culture and maybe also marry Japanese, and then at some point Japanese would accept me, still I wouldn't claim that I'm ethnically Japanese, and would understand that people see me a bit differently. And if there was a mass immigration from Austrians to Japan, then I would also say, no, I don't want Japan to become Austria. I want Japan to stay a homogeneous Japanese nation. So I'm against a total radical one or the other way. I think there's always some form of assimilation. This has always been also the reality. We have been true to reality here, but it has to be measured. It's also the question how many, how fast, from which culture, and there is a limit for this capacity. And obviously the capacity of Japan to take in Chinese people or Koreans, even though maybe Japanese would have a different opinion here, is higher than taking in African people or Norwegian people, and vice versa. The capacity for Austrians to take in Croatians or Italians or French people and assimilate them is higher than to take in Southeast Asians or Africans. So that's how I see it. But obviously, I get it. It's a very, very spicy debate. It has to be debated. And here you always, I think, have to make a difference between the legal question, the ethnic and cultural question, but also the philosophical level and the political reality.
So I want to tease that out a bit more. An Austrian cannot become an ethnic Japanese. Like, that's not possible. And a Japanese person cannot become ethnically Austrian. Even they might well integrate and be successful there, but you can't just change one's side. They can't. But yeah, a German could become an Austrian could become a German, because those are extraordinarily close. So maybe that's a bad example, because there's a sense of shared nationhood, even if they're different states and civic identities. But
even here, I would have to say, if like many Prussians would come to a small Austrian town, then if it's too many, then they would break the culture there. Like all the traditions or everything would break down there. So even this wouldn't be a big issue. But still, if it would go on and city by city, the regional culture would die, and vice versa, because people are quite different also within a nation. And we also want to maintain those differences.
My family, until they passed away, we still had Prussian-Austrian fights over what kind of dinner we eat at Christmas. So I hope the Austrians won. I can uniquely understand.
For your sake, I hope the Austrians won every Christmas.
Yeah, they did. Okay, we eat spätzle with rouladen, not potatoes.
Prussians are very good at many things, but cooking is not one of those things.
The Austrians won out in my family for sure. Okay, so yeah, Japanese can't become Austrian. Austrian can't become Japanese, but what about something that is more adjacent, that is clearly a different national ethnic identity, but it's closer, but it's within the same maybe civilizational umbrella? Do you think can a Polish person become an ethnic Austrian? Can a Croatian person become an ethnic Austrian? Because these are obviously close, especially you said Croatia, because they shared the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburg Empire before. They're obviously close and adjacent, but they're different. Can they become a genuine ethnic Austrian to you?
You see, here the question is what you mean by ethnicity. And it's actually like a philosophical question. Basically, it comes down to how do people react to you. An example, let's say a Polish person as a child is being adopted by an Eastern German family. He will have a totally unproblematic German identity. Why? Because culturally he's raised, assimilated as a German, and also from his phenotype, the looks, he appears completely normal German. He sees himself as a German, and he is perceived as a German. But obviously, if you look differently, people will not perceive you as an ethnical German. This will also change your own identity about yourself and will force you in a way to have a more complex understanding of your own history. And if this Polish person, although like from his DNA and his looks, he's completely like the majority of Eastern German people, let's take this for the sake of the argument, he sees Poland as any other Slavic nation. Poland, Czech Republic, no difference. But if suddenly his parents tell him, you know what, you were adopted from a Polish family, from a Polish city, from Krakow, then suddenly for him, his identity will shift and change, and he will say, okay, well, interesting, maybe I'll travel there once. Whenever like there's a soccer game between Germany and Poland, he will see it differently then. So these things are real if you make them real and if you think about them, yes, in a way. But of course, if you have a different ethnicity, people will react differently to you, and it doesn't mean they're racist or discriminatory. Again, if I wanted to go to Japan and then assimilate to Japan, still people will ask me, do you speak Japanese and where do you really come from? And I wouldn't see this as racist because it's just a very normal reaction. So I would say, yes, they can assimilate easier, but still, like the lineage is just a reality that just exists. It's not evil or good. It's just there, and you cannot really change it. But in many cases, like this example, it doesn't really matter if you don't make it an issue or don't even know about it.
Okay. So metapolitics. Most people have probably never heard the term.
Might I ask you also about your opinion, how you see it, or is this like?
Yeah,
I know you're the interviewer, I'm the interviewed, but I think it would be maybe interesting to see how you see this issue. Yeah?
You want to flip the script on me. I'm asking you all these hard and spicy questions because it's easier for me to ask the questions.
You can ask me anything I want. I'm just, it's out of your interest how you see it.
Yeah. You know? I mean, look, North Americans are different. Our people settled the land. I've got ancestors who were very early settlers who are as Canadian as you could possibly be. But I've also obviously got much more recent ancestors who came from places that used to be a part of Germany and used to be parts of Austria. But I mean, those places where my ancestors are from are no longer parts of Germany, no longer parts of Austria. And that doesn't make me Czech. That does not make me Polish, even though those are now a part of the geography of where they're from. I have no identity whatever with those places. So when people talk about, your identity is it's the geographical location. You live in this place, and therefore, Justin Trudeau used to say a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. You got the papers, you are therefore Canadian. I thought, well, okay. So that's just you're talking about us just being an economic zone again. It's purely geographical. You live there, therefore you are. I'm like, well, that would make me Polish. That would make me Czech, but I don't have as far as we can tell, I've done Ancestry.com. I've got no Czech. I've got no Polish. So I have no identity whatever but those places, even though I've got, I'm geographically from there. So I agree. But, North American society, I think, has always been by necessity more assimilating than the European nation states. We were, original English and French settlers combined with, the indigenous people who were here before. And so even the French and the English had to find some commonality, and there'd be intermarriage between them, more so than you would say between English and French people in Europe, because they were in separate polities, different kingdoms. And then we integrated Irish and Scottish, and then eventually Western Canada settled largely. There was Americans who came up with their own identities, Germans, Ukrainians, and then eventually, we had Chinese people come building the railroad. So we've always been a bit more fluid, but it was never until very recently wasn't a big issue, especially in English Canada, because there was still an Anglo identity. You might immigrate from Germany and we'd still eat a lot of German foods, but we'd also adopt the local foods. We would learn to speak English, and we would intermarry with English families, and we would take on an Anglo-Canadian identity. And there was what was the term you used? Genomorphosis?
Ethnogenesis.
Ethnogenesis. And so it was fine. But other communities that came from other civilizations and other more different ethnic backgrounds, they would integrate successfully, but not as much. Like we have a Chinatown in Calgary. We don't have a German town. We don't have a Ukrainian town. I'm a member of the Austrian club because it's one of the few good places I can get. I can find the food, but there's no area that's like this is the German area of town and it's clearly identified as such, and the architecture of all the buildings here is this. That just didn't happen. They assimilated to Anglo-Canadian culture. Most Chinese people have actually assimilated pretty well here, but it is still more distinct. You have a Chinatown, the architecture is different, the food is different, and so it's not 100%. So it's a more difficult question to answer here.
I would also make a difference between integration and assimilation here. For me, like integration is basically when you work well within the functioning society, and you can also integrate. It's a functional, structural thing as an ethnic enclave, as Chinatown, for example. But you can also integrate, for example, as a radical Muslim. So a lot of Muslim terrorists were very well integrated. They were studying and they looked completely normal. They paid their taxes and the bills. So, and for me, assimilation is when you completely identify with the ethno-cultural community of the nation, the community you want to be a part of. But what you said is very true. There's a saying, when a cat gets kitten in a stable, they're still cats and not horses. So obviously, this theory of total milieu theory, which is a staple of the left, is wrong in any case. It's wrong when it's about gender, but it's also wrong when it's about ethnicity. And both are taboos of this trans ideology that basically wants human beings to become atoms and to become completely interchangeable, like resources you can push around the globe. Sex change operations and changing your nationality all the time. You can become whatever you want. And this is obviously part of this ideology of modernity, I would say, this trans ideology of transgression, transsexual, trans-ethnic, and so on. And I think as conservatives, our thought has to be rooted in reality, and we just need to create a serious, scientific, but also measured debate about a subject that doesn't go in any radical or extreme direction, just looks at the facts and then thinks, okay, what do we learn from these facts, and how do they influence and how do they affect our politics?
I strongly would expect you'll agree with the critique I'm about to make, but I'd be interested to know why you think it is that, kind of the multiculturalist, I would say left, but it's not just the left. I mean, you could look at the CDU in Germany. Actually, frankly, even the conservatives in Canada are officially pro-multiculturalism. There's factions within the party that are, less so. But I would just say, so maybe the left is the wrong term for it. But multiculturalist ideology, broadly speaking, believes that, they don't seem to think that, Europeans, and this is an easier debate to define in the European context than, say, North America, as I discussed. But, say in the European context, they seem to believe that Europeans aren't allowed to have their own distinct countries, their own distinct nations, but every other country and every other civilization on the planet can. Nigerians are allowed to have Nigeria for Nigerians. And to say otherwise is colonialism. And that's actually probably fair, that when Europeans try to essentially come in large numbers and potentially even dominate India, that's colonialism. And that's probably a fair critique. What if it's the opposite? That, France should be predominantly, not maybe exclusively, but at least predominantly the preserve for Frenchmen. That Poland should be predominantly the preserve for the Polish. That is seen as racist, exclusionary, hyper-nationalist, overall just bad, negative thing. But if we said that, well, we shouldn't have a bunch of Poles moving to, or we shouldn't have a bunch of Frenchmen in Algeria, that's perfectly reasonable and could be violently resisted, as it was in the 1950s and 60s. That could be violently resisted, and that is a good thing. But if you just believe in, that France should maybe not have a ton of Algerians, that's racist. What do you think is the reasoning behind it? What is the philosophical grounding of it, that what's good for the goose is not good for the gander?
Now we're going to very deep into the roots of the great replacement, of replacement migration. And I would really say it's this ideology, this universalism of self-hatred and of white and European guilt. And you brought up the Algerian French example. I always bring up when I talk to left-wing people the white flight from South Africa. There's a huge remigration going on after hundreds and hundreds of years. The Boers, the people living there even longer than some of the invading black tribes, they're now leaving Africa. There's an immigration rate from whites from South Africa. Do you like this or not? Answer for most of the left-wingers, yeah, that's great, because the colonializers finally leave the country. They have nothing to do with from the first place. So Okay, and why is it then racist if I demand remigration for Europe, for people who just came here a few years ago, who are very often illegal, who contribute nothing to society, who 2 gang rapes a day in Germany cause tremendous horrors here? Not all of them, but like a very large number. It's completely incongruent, and it's just anti-European and anti-white. That's basically the suckers. That's basically the core of it. And it would be as if, when you bring up the colonial example, when the English colonized India, we would say it's racist if the Indians resist the British. If the Indians defend their nation against the British, that's an act of Indian racism, an anti-white Indian racism. That's how it is now. We are being called racist just for defending our own country and our own territory. And I think this is basically, a remnant of a secularized version of Christianity. It's an abuse of our history. You obviously have in Germany the Second World War, but for you have the colonization. In the UK, also the colonization. So everywhere you find a MacGuffin that is basically the core of this huge ideology of guilt. And guilt is something you can use to rule. It's a very powerful tool to rule people. And I would say, in the end, this destruction of European ethnic identity and national identity makes Europeans easier to govern. Divide et impera, divide and conquer. It makes it easier also for international corporations to sell their products. If you destroy nation states and you have only a huge amount of consumers who cannot organize themselves anymore, you have post-national gangland, which is totally chaotic, then it's easier to rule that, it's easier to sell there, and it's easier to make money. It's a free flow of information, of capital, of people all around the globe. And the nation states are a hindrance to this idea of a new feudalistic global order. But obviously we're going to bit into conspiracy theory there. I have no proof of that. I have no distinct group of people. But if I would need to make up a theory why some rulers, why some politicians are pushing for that, this would be my theory.
You used at the top of your answer, you used the term "great replacement." I'm going to have to dig into that, because this part right here is going to get clipped into something from the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and the whole constellation of kind of far left organizations that think this conversation should not be allowed to take place. That no one should be allowed to watch this, listen to this. Great replacement. When it's used on the left, they normally add the word theory at the end. I mean, I guess it's the way you can say conspiracy theory to instantly discredit something. There's obviously uncredible conspiracy theories, but in 2026, the conspiracy theorists are batting pretty good. They're kind of having their year. I've had to apologize to a few people. I was like, maybe you're not as crazy as I thought. But they add the word theory to the end. That this is a racist theory. It's made up. It's not real. So maybe if you want to elaborate on that, what do you mean by great replacement? Is it a theory? Is this? What do you mean by that?
First of all, about conspiracy theories, I think we need new conspiracy theories, because all the old ones ran out because they all became true. So the
flat earthers are the only ones holding out at this point.
Yeah, but when it comes to the great replacement, it's not a theory, it's a reality. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a government praxis. It's a descriptive reality, and it's just the product of birth rates of natives going down and replacement migration to replace these people fading away. And since the 1970s, in most European nations, we had no positive birth rates. And so since then, the whole population growth can be contributed to replacement migration or replacement births. So it's very descriptive. And what they do, in a very clever rhetoric trick, they take certain theories about why the great replacement is happening. Then they disprove those theories, and then they say the whole thing isn't happening at all. And this is as if you would look at the burning of Rome. We know there was a huge fire in Rome. The city burned for 1 week. This is the fact, the prescriptive fact. And now there are many theories. Some people said Nero himself burned Rome down. Others say the Christians did it. Others say it was just, an accident. But if you disprove one of these theories, the fire still happened. Same with JFK. There are many theories about who and why killed JFK. But if you disprove one of them, JFK still was killed. And it's the same with Great Replacement. Doesn't matter which theory is true and who is really responsible. It is happening. It's a description, and the prescription is remigration. So I don't really care who is behind it. I think this is a debate you can talk about. It's very interesting. Way more important is the question, what can you do about it? And obviously, this attempt of the left to claim it's a conspiracy theory, strawman it, refute it, and then claim it doesn't happen at all is very cheap and very easy to refute.
I should say, they still use the word theory at the end, but they don't actually seem to deny it actually takes place now. They used to deny it's taking place. Now they kind of say it's taking place and it's a good thing. Here's why you should support it. So they've kind of moved on. They're actually they kind of say theory at the end just because I guess they're used to saying it, and it maybe kind of helps to discredit it. But they don't really deny it now. It's just, yes, it's happening. But here's why you should like it. So I guess there is no denying. Of course, we have replacement migration. I mean, it's just math. It's undeniable. We're very deep into it. It's not a new thing at this point. I guess the question would be, is it intentional or not? Is this just the way it's happening? Why? Why do you think it's happening?
I think it's partly intentional. I would say there are three important groups who form this lobby of the Great Replacement. First, there are certain economic interests. For example, in Austria, there's a huge asylum lobby. People make a lot of money, lawyers, social workers. A question for you, see if you are good at guessing. Guess how much money, how much euros does it cost per month for one refugee, underage and unaccompanied. So he has no family, he's underage, and he lives in Vienna. And how much does it cost in 1 month to accommodate him?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to get onto something you mentioned kind of at the top. I promise we get back to it. Metapolitics. This is. I don't think.
Sorry, it was a question.
Sorry. I didn't catch it as a question. Do you want to rephrase?
Yes. Like, how much do you think does a minor refugee cost per month in Austria, in Vienna?
Well, just cut out this little part where I missed it. Yeah. I don't know, but I would imagine for the most part it'd be similar to Canada and most European countries where the net contribution of money in versus money out is obviously in the negative.
18,000 euros. One, minor migrant in Vienna, it's the highest rate, costs 18,000 euros a month. And this money goes into the asylum industry. So those people profit economically.
18,000 euros a month?
18,000 euros. 18,000. I can show you the newspaper article. You can put it on the screen.
Yeah, send it to us. We'll throw it up. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I mean, that's higher than I would expect. I expected it to be higher.
Crazy? Like, I don't know how many there are, but like, how long does an Austrian have to work to produce this before taxes? It's crazy. And so then the second group, political parties, they profit from mass migration because they just import the voters, naturalize them, and then they give them our money, and then they get voted by them. And then I would say is a third group, an ideological group who hates the nation, hates Christianity, hates white people, hates European people, like the self-hatred, especially in universities, and they just like it. They like it, they love it, they love the Great Replacement, and they are like a very small but a very loud group, especially in universities and media. This self-hatred, like an ideology. And I think these three groups combined, they create this very strong, very rich, very powerful lobby in economy, politics, and media.
Yeah, I know we certainly have that in Canada. There were, we've always had a fairly permissive, liberal immigration policy. But in the later years of Justin Trudeau, they did away with all controls. They just allowed anyone in. They largely did under the guise of student visas, which is too bad because we would have legitimate good students coming in, but we also then had a ton bad ones. We had these kind of diploma mills that were fake schools. They wouldn't actually really go to the school, and they were companies wanted this also for bringing in just importing cheap labor, and so this this undercut kind of lower class unskilled workers. Why would you hire a entitled Canadian who maybe they won't work as hard, because we grew up in a rich and plentiful, peaceful country. Hire the harder working guy from over here. Sometimes they will work harder, and it brought in all this cheap labor. So it very much it's often business interests. What I have a harder time understanding is that the official labor unions, not union members. Union members are actually kind of voting very much on the right in Canada now, and increasingly so in the United States as well. A kind of blue collar, not the government unions, which is actually most unions in Canada now, they're public sector, but private sector unions, the workers tend to be on the right, and they understand there's a huge mass migration problem. But the leadership of all the big unions in Canada, they are against cracking down on mass migration. And that doesn't make sense to me, because it would seem to be very directly in the interests of the workers. I'm kind of making like the Danish Social Democrat argument here that I very much agree with, that you're undercutting your workers here. It's supply and demand. If you have demand for workers, but you massively inflate the supply, but the demand stays the same, well, the price goes down. It's just the simplest law of economics. And so why would, I have yet to figure out why it's here. I'm going to guess it might be the same in Europe, that these labor organizations are for open borders, even though it's completely cooking the supply and demand of having a strong working class.
True. It's very peculiar. I would say it's a treason of the working class by the Marxists. And this is because the Marxists, the socialists, revolutionaries, they were disappointed by the native working class because they wouldn't do a communist revolution with them during the Cold War. That didn't happen. You had all the student movements, the SDS in America, the student revolts in France, and these were all entitled Marxist students who read Marcuse, Adorno, and all these, Marcuse, Adorno, and all these thinkers, and they were angry that their own working classes didn't revolt with them. And then basically, I think they were looking for a new revolutionary subject in the working class, because all of these trade union organizers, all these bosses, and all these intelligentsia, of course, they are not workers themselves, and they've betrayed their own workers, because with them they cannot make a revolutionary socialist movement, and they think with importing Arabs and importing migrants, they have another attempt and another shot for their revolutionary Marxist dreams. But that's just my personal theory. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're also just mad. I don't know.
Well, they might be half right that they're perhaps importing revolutionaries, but it might not be a Marxist revolution. It might be more along the lines of the Iranian Revolution that you're going to get. Most of these guys don't seem to be steeped heavily in Marx more than they're steeped in the writings of an Ayatollah.
True.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to something you mentioned right near the top of our discussion, and that was metapolitics. I don't think most people have even heard the term. You use it. If I did a word search in your, I read your book, Regime Change from the Right. Well, let's put an image of the book up. Oh, there you go. You've got it right there. You can order it on Amazon. I'm actually shocked you can order that on Amazon still.
I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that it's still on Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah. Like when I don't get canceled from something, I'm like, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
Anyway, you can get it on Amazon. It's I think it's very fairly priced. But if I did a word search of it, I think metapolitics would come up as one of the most frequently used words throughout it. Why don't you just kind of give a short, what is metapolitics and how does it apply to the broader debate around Western identity, Western civilization, remigration? What do you mean by it and how does it apply?
If my fellow activists will see this clip, they're going to laugh, because I was known for a while in Vienna and Austria as somebody who couldn't finish one sentence without using the term metapolitics. But
I think that's a fair critique. I've read the book. I think you like the word a lot.
Yeah. Why? Because the concept is so important, and that's why the right wing, the conservatives, always lose, because they don't get it. They think the parliament is the center of power. No, the parliament is a stage. The center of power is somewhere else. It's in media. It's in the discourse, the words, and the thoughts. So language and thinking are intertwined. And if you control the words, if you control the media, if you control the culture, then you control the national debate. And on the long run, you control the elections. And you can change political parties, even the enemy political parties. That's happened in Europe. So in Europe, the left-wing culture, the left-wing media, all the moves in the books, they were pushing this ideology and moving ever farther to the left, and the conservatives followed them. So the center, the real center in the Overton window of political opportunities was moving to the left, because the left were going leftwards and the right were following. And then if you meet in the middle ground is always moving. And that's why the left wins, because they understand that power lies not in party politics. It also doesn't just lie in numbers and facts and studies. It lies in emotions, in strong images. And you were talking about the anti-hate groups in Canada. Just look at this amazing meta-political success of the left. They've coined the term hate. We also even use it, hate speech. So hate is something that is associated with the right wing. Hate, as a basic human emotion. I think the left-wing people hate as much, and maybe even more, as we do, but still they've made it a reality in our mind, and therefore reality in our political world, in our discourse, as hate is now something attributed to the right. And that's what I mean by metapolitics. Everything that's outside of party politics is actually really stronger and influences party politics way more. And that's why we need way more alternative media, way more right-wing activists, way more right-wing think tanks, way more right-wing counterculture, music, comics, memes, because that's where the actual power lays. And that's also, I would say, the message of this book.
I mean, this conversation can go a few ways from here, but I want to test your theories a bit with some real-world examples. In Britain, for example, I'd say, identitarians or nationalists, they won the metapolitical debate on Brexit, largely fueled on the immigration issue, that if we have Brexit, we take back national sovereignty, we'll get out of the EU's system of open borders, and we could then stop mass migration, take back some national sovereignty and control here. They won the debate. They won the vote. They won the Brexit referendum. And then they won subsequent elections with big conservative majority governments to follow through on Brexit and end mass migration as one of probably the single biggest motivating factor behind the Brexit vote. There's quite a few other things, but that was the big one. They won the votes. They won the metapolitics. They won people over. The legacy media was still over, and most big institutions were still against Brexit. They were still pro-mass migration. But they won the people over. They won the referendum. And then they won with Boris Johnson. And then they won, with Theresa May. They won like 2 or 3 majority governments afterwards. But mass migration somehow got worse. So they won the metapolitical debate. They won the partisan political parliamentary debate. But they still lost. That's just the British example, but there's other examples as well. In Germany, the most recent federal election, a big majority of Germans voted for the AfD in second place, and the CDU in first, combined a very big majority. Friedrich Merz ran on, shutting the borders, ending mass migration. They still got more mass migration. So
can I maybe just,
even where they're winning debates and they're winning the parliamentary elections, they're losing in the actual results at the end of the day.
Can I answer to the English question first? Because I think it's actually, in reality, a proof of the metapolitical theory. Because you're completely right. The motivation for Brexit was migration. But if you look at the talking points of the discussion, people talked mostly not about migration, but about economics. It was kind of a proxy issue. Why? Because it was, and it still is, too spicy to talk about mass deportations, which actually would have been needed to stop the Great Replacement or a fortress Britain, like building a wall and the Rwanda plan, all of this. So they won the political power, but they did not win the metapolitical power. Why? Because in the UK, there are no big media, no big alternative media, no big street movements or big NGOs and think tanks. There's no counter-elite, there's no power in academia who is demanding mass deportations, and who is demanding a complete closed border policy. This talking point still is not really in the British media and society, and you see this right now with the taboos that Rupert Lowe is breaking with Restore Britain. So what I would say is, if conservatives and patriots get in power, even if they want to do certain political things, they are unable to do them if those things are not completely normalized. All the taboos have to be broken. And you see right now, Rupert Lowe is starting to break these taboos right now, years and years after Brexit, which was a proxy vote, a nativist vote, but in the debate didn't really normalize the idea of mass deportations or completely shutting the border fence. So I would say that Brexit was a prime example of conservatives winning political power without having a real meta-political influence in media, academia, or on the national discourse.
Mm-hmm. Well, but in the German example, I mean, it's a different set of circumstances. You have the so-called firewall, where unofficially it's a rule you're not allowed to deal with the AfD. But there, a big majority of people voted for parties that would stop mass migration. And mass migration was very much at the front. Everyone, the AfD was saying it out loud. Even Friedrich Merz, I mean, I didn't believe it. It's this CDU at this point. I didn't believe it, but he was saying, yeah, no, we're shutting the border. Border controls are coming back. We're ending mass we're ending mass migration. The Syrians, with Syria safe, can go back to Syria. But it didn't happen, even though a big majority of Germans voted for it, and it was explicit. It wasn't mixed with a bunch of economic stuff. It wasn't, the National Health Service in Britain will save money and, arguments, around that kind of thing. It was explicit. But there, I mean, it was less than 24 hours after the votes came in, and he said, no, ending mass migration's off the table. It was less than 24 hours. So there, I feel like the meta-political debate was won to an extent. I mean, it was not a resounding win, but a majority of people voted for parties that were explicit about this issue. But then the way that translated on the parliamentary level, they lost.
I wouldn't say that the meta-political debate in Germany was won at all. I wouldn't say that in German media, remigration, sending Syrians home, is normalized at all in the debate. And this is where I would measure meta-political victory. So I agree with you, it was a political victory for Merz and for right-wing parties. But why did people vote for Merz? They voted for Merz because still this idea of the Nazification of the AfD, this demonization, is still so strong in German media, therefore meta-politics, that the majority is not yet voting for the AfD. So a lot of people in Germany who are voting for the conservatives actually have the convictions of the AfD, but they still have this ideological stranglehold of the left that they think voting for the AfD is something evil, is something negative. And this is the meta-political force and dominance of the left. And Merz is profiting from that because obviously he's not as attacked. So it's not verboten to vote for Merz. And he's using AfD talking points because he knows what people actually want. But in the end, he betrays them again and again. So the meta-political power would be to demonize the AfD, that the AfD gets substantial majorities, which make it impossible to govern without them. This would be the meta-political victory. And for this, you have to normalize remigration, you have to break these taboos, and you have to break the ideological dominance of the left. So I would say that these political victories aren't real results of a big meta-political victory, because still these ideas are not normalized. And I'm a living example of that. I wrote a book about remigration, and until recently I got banned from Germany. I got driven out of German cities. German police was crashing my book readings. And this is not really a sign that a talking point is normalized and mainstreamed in a certain society. So I would say that we have not yet reached at all this meta-political goal of having totally mainstreamed our ideas and the question of the Great Replacement Society. If this would be the case, then it would be debated as global warming, as a big, important question that everybody has to find an answer for. Every political party would have to bring up a remigration policy because it's so normalized and it's so standard that this remigration is an important question, and then it will come policy. So I think we are meta-politically too weak. And what you're actually seeing is populist wins by populist parties, right-wing populists even in the parliament, like in Italy, maybe in France, also sometimes in Austria, but lacking the meta-political the metapolitical power. The think tanks, the academics, the experts, the alternative media, the activists on the streets, and therefore their political power becomes futile because it's not backed by a real metapolitical force.
I want to challenge your theory on, maybe this is the hardest challenge to your theory with
Please.
the United States. There is a very large populist right movement, or national conservatives. There is a very, very vibrant alternative media. All the biggest media in America are actually all alternatives and independents at this point, to various degrees. Trump won, running very explicitly. His first election was build the wall. He even said he was going to ban Muslims from immigrating. Like, stuff that is like, that was outside the Overton window. He was running for president on stuff that was outside the Overton window. He won the first time. The second time, obviously, it was a dispute, but was ultimately not returned to office. And then he returned to office again. He's going to build the wall. There's going to be mass deportations. They win the presidency. Republicans win the House. Republicans win the Senate. After a very short experience with mass deportations, they've essentially pulled the plug on it. They're not doing mass deportations anymore. They kind of hyped it up a lot on social media. They'd have these like kind of, set the hype music. They'd have these little edits going out, showing, having ICE going and, arresting some pedo or something and who should be deported. They were very public about it, but, there was some backlash, in Minnesota and whatnot. And they've just kind of pulled the plug on it. They're still doing deportations, and they're doing it more aggressively than Europe. But the idea of mass deportations, that everyone who's illegal is going to get out. Now they're limiting, Trump has said, well, if they're working on farms or, they're doing these kinds of things and they haven't committed a violent crime in America, we're not going to really get around to it. There I feel like kind of business interests have intervened to lobby and say, okay, you want to get rid of the guys committed, you want to get rid of gangbangers who are illegal migrants, fine. But, the guys who are just picking berries on a farm in California, no, they get to stay even if they're illegal. There's no wall. I mean, there more, they have cracked down on their southern border, but there is no wall. He's had 3 terms now. He's into his 3rd term, and there's no wall. It kind of gets negotiated away for other things. So I feel like they very much did win the metapolitical debate. That was what people wanted. Super majorities of Americans say they want it. Substantial parts of even Democratic voters want it. They won total political power. They have the Supreme Court. They have the presidency. They've got the House, and they've got the Senate. They had everything set for it, but it appears that project, they're done with it. So I don't, am I wrong? I think they won the metapolitical debate, and then they won the power political parliamentary debate. They won the votes, and they still lost.
So, first of all, metapolitics is not something you can win once, like an election, and then you're granted power for some years. It's an ongoing battle. You have to always project power. What I would say here is a classic example of conservatives winning one battle and then going home, back to the farms, back to the Shire, thinking everything's done for, and now everything will work out. And that's not the case, because you need to project power as the base against for your own political party when it's in office. And then is when the real work starts, because that's a big problem. There's a pain point for every right-wing politician. And Trump talks about his business friends, and there are many lobbies in America influencing him all the time. And if the remigration voter base does not become a lobby itself, which encourages Trump or any politician, but also becomes a pain point for them. If they betray their voters, then they will get betrayed over and over again. One example is Meloni in Italy. She promised a sea blockade when she was in power, no sea blockade. This would be the moment where right-wing alternative media, independent media, right-wing activists would need to do actions, get on the streets, do a sea blockade themselves to embarrass her, to force her to step in and to do something. One example, just to be concrete, we in Austria did this in 2018 when there was a big UN migration pact, and we had a government of the Freedom Party and the Conservative Party in Austria. They had intentions to sign it. They didn't really care about it. But then we made a huge campaign, petitioning, demonstrations. We brought it to the public attention. And then the Freedom Party and really put a lot of pressure on the Conservative Party. And Austria was one of the only Western European countries who did not sign this pact. Minor example, but if we would have slept, it would have done nothing, then nothing would have happened. So we need to become a lobby ourselves. We need to become loud and powerful, and we need to support, but also criticize the right-wing party in power. Another concrete example. So the left is very well organized. The right didn't win over the metapolitical dominance in America, the universities, the ideological state apparatuses. According to Louis Althusser, they were still very much left-wing. But the right had a very good momentum going on. Like now we had ICE. And what happened to ICE? ICE, during the raids, was harassed, persecuted, watched, and hindered by the left-wing people, by the Antifa, in a way that made them almost powerless or really slowed them down. And what did right-wingers do? They clamored about it online. So why didn't they create an ICE supporting movement, going there, binding the forces, of the left, not violently, obviously, but just filming them, talking to them, hindering them, and hindering the ICE raids and helping ICE, like a volunteer ICE helping force. Just one example, what one could have done. But the problem is, in my opinion, that the right wing doesn't really understand how they have to work while the political party is in power. So again, I would say yes, it is a loss, but it isn't against my theory of change, because you see it on the left working all the time, where left-wing politicians are in power. During Black Lives Matter, the left-wing groups start acting. They start forming a radical flank. They start pressuring, they start lobbying, and they're way more effective in that than the right.
I think you, especially in the first part of your answer, maybe touched on it right. We talked about in Austria where the People's Party, the kind of the mainstream conservative party, wanted to sign a migration pact, and then there was pressure from the right. In the American example, I think the problem is that Trump voters are too loyal to Trump. That there's a cult of personality around it. I know a lot of people watching. I'm kind of offside with a lot of Western centered readers and viewers on the Iran war. I think it's a total betrayal of everything Trump stands for. He ran for president 3 times saying no more these forever war, Team America World Police. And he was explicitly said, no war with Iran. The Democrats are going to get us into a war with Iran, and it could be World War III. And then he does it anyway. And most Republicans, there's a significant dissenting minority, but most Republicans say, well, Trump's for it, therefore I'm going to trust him, and I'm for the war. Same thing with ending the mass deportations with ICE. ICE is still doing its thing, but not anywhere near the scale that it was. Well, Trump says it's too hot politically, so we're just going to have to take his word for it. And this is a case, I think, of where the voter coalition is too loyal to its leadership, that the leadership does not fear their own core voters. In Alberta, I know you wouldn't know about this, but during COVID, we had a conservative government that was supposed to be a populist conservative government, and then they did kind of the same kind of lockdowns and mandates as Justin Trudeau was trying to impose nationally, and other left-wing politicians in other provinces. In Alberta, we're not that loyal to our leaders. We overthrow. Actually, we haven't had a conservative leader. We're very conservative here. We have pretty much just conservative governments. We haven't had a conservative premier finish a single term since I was in high school. 2004 was the last time one conservative leader did not get overthrown during their own term. So we overthrow them all the time. So we overthrew that guy. And it's because we're loyal to them to a point. They're the leader of the party, they're the leader of the movement to an extent. But if they deviate, at least in Alberta, we overthrow them. Nationally, we tend not to as well. We're like, well, trust the leader, trust the plan. They're plan followers. It's all a part of the plan. And I think maybe where it went wrong in the United States is Trump became too dominant with the movement, so that when he deviated from the program, people just said, it's a part of the plan. We trust the leader, and we're not going to therefore make him pay a political price for deviating from it. Which, again, I see sort of a meta-political failure, but I see that as that's more on the parliamentary side, that we're not willing to make the leader of the party, of the movement, of the country, etc., pay a political price on a political level for betraying what they said they stood for.
True. I completely agree with you. And that's a problem because we should follow ideas, not people, because it is about ideas and it's about policy and not about politicians. And I also understand, yes, some Trump voters, some other people feel betrayed. I have to say, for me, the way more important point in geopolitics, where I also have my opinion, is migration, is mass deportations, because that's actually what's really saving the American nation. That's also what would cause irreversible damage, contrary to geopolitical decisions, if it wasn't pushed through. And here again, I think it's a question not about the theory of change, about meta politics, but more about political willpower and organization. Because we need to learn from successful lobbies. Here, all this clamoring about Trump and other right-wing politicians, they're influenced by these lobbies. True, yeah. But if we cry about it, it doesn't change. We need to become a lobby ourselves. And how does it work? It's very clear and very easy. So how does the NRA work? How does the pro-life movement work? How does the Israel lobby work in America? They create powerful think tanks and institutions that influence the core voter base of the political party. They get their data. They organize them. They create newsletters, petitions. They create huge events, and then they forge a political weapon. They turn a political weapon out of the 5, 10, 15% of the core voter base of the political party that are diehard fans and hardcore fans of the ideology, and then they use them in grassroots constituency activism to influence the certain politicians. And where is this happening on the right? Where is this happening on the question of migration? I'm not hearing about anything about the lobby for remigration, organizing big conferences, mobilizing the Republican voter base who voted for Trump to stop mass migration. We just are talking. We have so many talking heads. We have so many podcasts, influencers, alternative media. What we're lacking is grassroots organizers, activists, think tanks to understand that we really need to become a lobby, and those things not happen by themselves, by vibes and memes, but by grassroots, brutal grassroots organization. And I think that's why it's not working so well in terms of remigration, because the remigration movement is very vocal, very visible, especially if you're on X, but it's not very organized. It's not very structured. It doesn't really have a sense of power like the left wing or some other right wing lobbies have. So I stick by my theory of change and by meta politics. Sorry, I wasn't convinced, but I agree with you that we are not really having big successes on this playfield until now.
Well, I'm not convinced by it. I'm just looking at where have we won certain battles, but still not actually won the war. So that's where I'm going. I think what you were just saying was also an excellent plug for your own organization, the Institute for Remigration.
Well, of course, this was by accident. Yeah, that's exactly what we were going to do. I've been an activist for a while. We've done a lot of things. Maybe some of your viewers even know about Defend Europe, where we chartered a ship and went to the Mediterranean. We put up fences in the Italian-French Alps. We blocked streets. So I've been doing a lot, and my office was the streets. Been also organizing a lot of rallies and demonstrations. And now I want to focus on exactly this field, because I think that's the missing puzzle piece of the remigration right-wing movement. We have a lot of great alternative media, which is of utmost importance. So I think what you're doing is really metapolitically very, very important. And as you said, no one else in Canadian media would even talk to someone like me. It takes someone like you who is independent, who can choose to whom he talks by himself. Huge, very important. We have activist movements, we have parties, but I think like kind of a missing piece are think tanks, organizers who take all these resources, forge certain narrative strategies to turn us into a real powerful lobby. And that's what we're intending to do with the Institute for Remigration, which is in statu nascendi, like in the state of being founded right now.
Okay. Well, Martin Sellner, I'm very grateful for your time. Keep up the work you're doing. Keep us up to date with what's happening, and perhaps we'll touch base. I'm going to be over in your neck of the woods not too long from now.
Thank you very much, and greetings to all Canadian patriots from Austria.
Grüß.